Park Hannah walked into the massive council chamber carrying nothing but a simple black bag and a worn notebook. She looked like any other graduate student who was excited to witness history being made. The chamber was huge, with golden walls that stretched up so high she could barely see the ceiling. Hundreds of seats were arranged in perfect circles, with each row higher than the one before it. The alien delegates sat in their special chairs that were built to fit their different body shapes. Some were twice as tall as humans, while others were so small they needed platforms to reach their microphones. She found an empty seat in the very back row, where the shadows were darkest. Her plain black uniform made her blend in perfectly with the dark corners. Nobody paid attention to one more human student scribbling notes in a cheap notebook. The aliens were too busy preparing for their important discussion about whether Earth deserved to join their exclusive club. They had been talking about this decision for months, and today was the day they would finally share their thoughts with each other. The first speaker was Kethver, who represented the Altarian Empire. His blue skin sparkled under the bright lights and his forearms moved gracefully as he spoke. His voice was deep and powerful as it came through the translation device that hung from the ceiling. He talked about how humans were still too young as a species to understand the complex rules of galactic politics. According to him, Earth had only discovered space travel a few hundred years ago, which was nothing compared to the thousands of years that his people had been exploring the stars. Hannah wrote down every word he said, but not for the reasons everyone thought. She wasn't taking notes for her thesis about interspecies communication like her fake student identification card claimed. Instead, she was recording everything for her real bosses back on Earth. The woman sitting quietly in the back row was actually Commander Park Hannah of Earth's Strategic Intelligence Division. She had spent 3 years learning 17 different alien languages and studying the behavior patterns of 43 different species. All of that training had led to this moment, where she would spend the next 6 months learning everything she could about the beings who thought they were judging humanity. The second speaker was Queen Zikra from the Vespian Collective. Her body looked like a giant insect with shimmering wings that made clicking sounds when she moved. Her voice was sharp and high-pitched as she agreed with everything Kethver had said. She believed that humans were too aggressive and emotional to be trusted with advanced technology. She mentioned several wars that had happened on Earth in recent centuries as proof that humans could not live peacefully with other species. Her compound eyes glowed red as she spoke about how dangerous it would be to give humans access to weapons that could destroy entire planets. Hannah kept writing, but inside she was thinking about how wrong these aliens were. They thought they knew everything about humans from watching news broadcasts and reading history books. They had no idea about the real strength that humans possessed: the ability to adapt to any situation, the courage to explore unknown places, the creativity to solve problems that seemed impossible. These aliens, with all their advanced technology, had forgotten what it meant to take risks and grow stronger from facing challenges. The third speaker was Thokmer from the Gorillian Republic. He was enormous even by alien standards, with thick brown fur covering his muscular body. His hands were so big that he had trouble operating the small controls on his podium. He kept apologizing for the technical difficulties as he struggled to make his presentation work. When he finally got it running, he talked about how humans were too primitive to contribute anything useful to the council. He said that Earth had nothing to offer except raw materials and cheap labor. His deep voice shook the entire chamber as he laughed at the idea of humans participating in important galactic decisions. As Thokmer spoke, Hannah noticed something interesting. He accidentally knocked over a water dispenser with his elbow and didn't even notice. The clear liquid spread across the floor, creating a puddle that several smaller delegates had to walk around. None of the other council members said anything about the mess. They just acted like it was normal for someone to be so careless during an important meeting. This told Hannah a lot about how the council really worked. The bigger and stronger species could do whatever they wanted while everyone else had to deal with the consequences. The fourth speaker was Lysandra from the Etherean Collective. She was completely transparent except for a faint blue glow that outlined her human-like shape. She could phase through solid objects, which she demonstrated by walking through her podium and floating above her chair. Her voice sounded like music as she explained why humans were not ready for council membership. She believed that humans were too focused on physical things and could not understand the spiritual aspects of advanced civilization. According to her, humans needed at least another 1,000 years of evolution before they could appreciate the deeper meanings of existence. While Lysandra was speaking, Hana watched her phase through a maintenance worker who was trying to clean up Thokimar's water spill. The alien worker stumbled and nearly fell, but Lysandra didn't even acknowledge that another living being existed. She just continued her speech about spiritual enlightenment and higher consciousness. As if nothing had happened, this kind of behavior was exactly what Hana had been sent to observe. These aliens talked about being advanced and civilized, but they couldn't even show basic respect for the people who worked to keep their space station running. The final speaker of the day was Admiral Vexmore from the Zentarian Federation. His species looked almost human except for their silver skin and completely black eyes. He wore a military uniform covered with medals and badges that showed his high rank in their space fleet. His speech was different from the others because he actually said some positive things about humans. He admitted that human military tactics were creative and unpredictable, which had impressed several council observers. However, he still believed that humans were too dangerous to be given full membership. He suggested that Earth should be offered a limited partnership that would allow the Council to monitor human activities while giving humans access to some basic technologies. As the session ended, Hana closed her notebook and watched the delegates file out of the chamber. Their massive forms cast long shadows across the golden walls. Some moved gracefully while others lumbered along, making loud noises with each step. She noticed how they separated into small groups based on their species, with very little mixing between different types of aliens. The unity they claimed to represent was clearly just for show. When humans were watching, Hana followed the crowd through the gleaming corridors of the space station. The walls were covered with art and symbols from dozens of different worlds, but everything was arranged to show off the power and wealth of the council members. She passed beings that were taller than trees and others that were smaller than house cats. Some had fur or scales, while others were made of energy or living metal. Despite all their differences, they all shared one thing in common. They all believed that humans were beneath them. As she walked back to her small dormitory room, Hana allowed herself a tiny smile. The aliens thought they were so smart and advanced, but they had no idea what was really happening. They believed they were judging whether Earth deserved to join their club, but the truth was much more interesting. Earth was judging whether these aliens deserved humanity's respect, and based on what she had seen today, the council was failing that test badly. Tomorrow she would begin the real work of her mission. She had 6 months to study every species on the council and learn all their secrets. What she discovered would determine humanity's next move in the galaxy. The aliens thought they held all the power, but they were about to learn that underestimating humans was the biggest mistake they could make. 3 weeks had passed since Hana first sat in that back row of the council chamber, and now she had become invisible in the best possible way. Every alien on the station knew her as the quiet human student who was always scribbling notes about their languages and customs. They would nod politely when they saw her in the corridors, and some even stopped to answer her innocent questions about their cultures. What none of them realized was that every conversation was carefully planned and every question was designed to extract valuable information. Her cover story was perfect. She was supposedly working as a research assistant for Professor Kim Minho, who was studying communication patterns between different species. The real Kim Minho was back on Earth teaching linguistics at Seoul University and had no idea that someone was using his name and credentials on a space station thousands of light years away. Hana had studied his research papers for months and could discuss his theories as if she had written them herself. When anyone asked about her work, she would talk excitedly about phonetic structures and grammatical evolution, while secretly memorizing everything they told her about military codes and trade routes. Admiral Vexmore had become her most valuable source of information. The silver-skinned Zentarian seemed to enjoy having an audience for his war stories and tactical discussions. He would meet with Hana in the station cafe every few days to share coffee and tales of his glorious military career. What he thought was harmless bragging to an impressed student was actually detailed intelligence. about fleet positions and defensive capabilities, Hannah learned that the mighty Zentarian Federation kept most of their ships spread across 12 different sectors, which left each area dangerously vulnerable to a coordinated attack. The Admiral loved explaining how superior their military technology was compared to primitive human weapons, he described their plasma cannons and energy shields in great detail, never suspecting that Hannah had a perfect memory for technical specifications. Every measurement and power rating he mentioned was being recorded by the tiny device hidden in her notebook. Earth's engineers were already working on improvements to their own weapons based on information she had sent home through encrypted messages disguised as academic papers. Ambassador Corlin from the Christic Dominion was another useful source. She was made of living crystal that sparkled with different colors depending on her mood, and she took great pride in her people's advanced technology. During their conversations, she would casually mention how Christic mining operations extracted rare metals from asteroid belts or how their transportation networks move goods across the galaxy. Her people had developed amazing machines that could transform raw materials into finished products in minutes, but she assumed that a human student could never understand such complex science. What Corlin didn't know was that Hannah understood every word and was carefully mapping out the Christic supply chains. The crystal being thought she was being kind by explaining simple concepts to a primitive human, but she was actually revealing the exact locations of mining facilities and manufacturing centers. This information was incredibly valuable because it showed which planets were essential to keeping the Christic economy running. A few well-placed disruptions could cripple their entire industrial system, but the most interesting discoveries came from simply watching and listening. Hannah had learned to read alien body language and could tell when someone was lying or hiding something. She noticed how Ambassador Scarth from the Draconian Empire would flinch whenever anyone mentioned the Outer Rim conflicts. His red scales would darken and his forked tongue would flick nervously across his lips. This told her that the dragons were more involved in those distant wars than they admitted publicly. The Aquarian representative Tadesha was even more revealing. She was a beautiful blue-skinned being who could breathe both air and water, but her graceful appearance hid nervous habits that gave away important secrets. Whenever someone discussed certain trade routes through the Coral Nebula, she would immediately check her communication device as if expecting bad news. Hannah realized that the Aquarians were having serious problems with pirates or rebels in that region and were trying to keep it secret from the other council members. These small behavioral clues painted a picture of a galactic government that was much weaker than it appeared on the surface. Each species was dealing with their own problems and conflicts, but they all pretended to be strong and united when they met in the council chamber. The facade of harmony was carefully maintained, but Hannah could see the cracks in their foundation. Her biggest breakthrough came completely by accident. She was reviewing security footage for her supposed research into nonverbal communication patterns when she noticed something strange. Several council members were meeting in secret after the official sessions ended. They thought they were being careful by using maintenance corridors and empty conference rooms, but the station's security system recorded everything. The pattern recognition software that Hannah had smuggled onto the station identified the same group of aliens meeting repeatedly over the past month. Sometimes it was just 3 or 4 beings, but other times the group included almost a dozen representatives from different species. And they were clearly planning something important, and they didn't want the other council members to know about it. The meetings always happened late at night when most of the station was quiet. The participants would arrive separately and leave at different times to avoid being seen together. Hannah managed to identify most of the regular attendees, including some very surprising faces. Admiral Vexmore was there along with Ambassador Corlin and several others who had seemed friendly toward humans during public discussions. This discovery changed everything. Hannah had assumed that the council was united in their attitude toward humanity, but now she realized that there were at least 2 different factions working against each other. Some members wanted to reject Earth's application completely, while others supported limited membership with strict conditions. But there might be a third group that she hadn't identified yet, and their goals were still unknown. The secret meetings also explained some of the strange comments she had been hearing during public Sessions certain delegates would make references that seemed random, but now Hannah understood they were coded messages to their allies. Other council members would react with confusion or suspicion, which meant they were being deliberately kept uninformed about whatever was being planned. As she walked back to her dormitory that night, Hannah felt both excited and worried. The intelligence she was gathering was incredibly valuable, but the situation was more complex than anyone on Earth had expected. The Council wasn't just evaluating humanity, they were also fighting among themselves about what to do with the human problem. Some aliens wanted to destroy Earth before it became too powerful, while others saw opportunity in an alliance with a younger species. She sent another encrypted report home that night disguised as a research paper about temporal linguistics. The message contained everything she had learned about fleet positions, supply chains, and political divisions within the Council. But more importantly, it included her growing suspicion that humanity wasn't the only species being evaluated here. The Council members were also testing each other, and the results of those tests might determine the future of the entire galaxy tomorrow. She would continue her careful observations and innocent questions. But now she knew that she was walking through a minefield of competing interests and hidden agendas. One wrong step could expose her mission and put Earth in terrible danger. The aliens still thought she was just a harmless student, but that illusion was becoming harder to maintain as she learned more about their secrets. The game was getting more dangerous, but Hannah was exactly where she needed to be. 2 months into her mission, Hannah faced her first real crisis. The Council announced a surprise evaluation of all visiting scholars and exchange students on the station. They claimed it was a routine academic exercise to test everyone's understanding of galactic law and diplomatic protocols, but Hannah knew better. The timing was too convenient, and several Council members had been watching the human students more carefully in recent weeks. Someone suspected that not all the visitors were what they appeared to. Beatty announcement came during breakfast in the main cafeteria. Commander Colvin from the Nexian Republic stood at the front of the room with his tall, thin frame casting a long shadow across the floor. His people looked almost like humans except for their pale gray skin and completely white eyes. He spoke in a calm voice that somehow made his words seem more threatening than if he had shouted. The evaluation would take place over 3 days and would cover everything from trade regulations to conflict resolution procedures. Hannah felt her heart rate increase but kept her expression neutral. She had memorized thousands of pages of council laws and procedures during her training, but now she would have to demonstrate that knowledge without revealing how much she really understood. A genuine graduate student might know the basic principles but wouldn't have the detailed expertise that a military intelligence officer possessed. She needed to find the perfect balance between competence and ignorance. The first day of testing was written examinations in individual cubicles. Hannah sat in a small white room with a computer terminal that displayed questions in perfect Earth English. The translation technology was so advanced that she could barely tell the original text had been written in alien languages. She read each question carefully and crafted answers that showed appropriate knowledge without being too sophisticated. When asked about trade dispute resolution, she mentioned the basic mediation procedures but deliberately left out several important exceptions that only experienced diplomats would know. When questioned about military intervention protocols, she gave the standard textbook answer, while ignoring the secret clauses that Admiral Vexmore had accidentally revealed during one of their coffee meetings. The hardest part was pretending to be impressed by laws that she could clearly see were designed to favor older, more powerful species. The questions about human history and culture were particularly tricky. The Council had obviously done extensive research on Earth, but their information was incomplete and sometimes completely wrong. They seemed to think that all humans shared the same beliefs and customs, with no understanding of how diverse human societies really were. Hannah had to resist the urge to correct their misconceptions and instead gave answers that matched their flawed assumptions. By the end of the first day, she was mentally exhausted from constantly monitoring every word she spoke. Several other human students looked confused and worried, but Hannah made sure to appear appropriately stressed, like someone who was struggling with difficult material. The real test would come on day 2 when they moved to practical exercises and group discussions. The second day brought new challenges as students were divided into mixed species teams for mock diplomatic scenarios Hannah found herself working with. Velter, a young Altarian whose blue skin was lighter than the older members of his species. There was also Klixa, a student from the Vespian collective whose compound eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. The fourth team member was Li Jinwoo, a genuine human exchange student from the civilian education program who seemed both excited and terrified to be participating. Their assignment was to resolve a fictional resource conflict between two imaginary planets the scenario involved. Competing claims to asteroid mining rights with both sides presenting reasonable arguments for their position. Hannah immediately saw several obvious solutions, but she had to guide her teammates toward the answer without appearing to take control of the situation. What surprised her was how naturally the young beings worked together. Velter shared his people's organizational abilities without any of the arrogance that characterized older Altarians. He genuinely wanted to find a fair solution that would satisfy both fictional planets. Klixa offered analytical insights that were far more sophisticated than the simple-minded aggression that Queen Zikra had displayed in the council chamber. Even Li Jinwoo contributed emotional intelligence and creative thinking that impressed their alien teammates as they worked through the problem. Hannah realized something important that she would need to report back to Earth. The younger generation of aliens was completely different from their elders. These students had grown up with more contact between species and didn't carry the same prejudices and fears that dominated council politics. They saw cooperation as natural rather than threatening, and they respected each other's abilities regardless of which planet they came from. But she also noticed that several council members were observing the group exercises with obvious displeasure. Ambassador Scarth watched with his red eyes narrowed as the mixed teams solved problems that had puzzled council committees for years. Commander Colvin took detailed notes whenever he saw young beings from different species sharing knowledge freely. The older aliens clearly didn't like what they were seeing. During lunch break, Hannah overheard a heated discussion between several council members. They were speaking in what they thought was a private alcove, but her enhanced hearing allowed her to catch most of their words. They were worried about the younger generation becoming too independent and forming alliances that crossed species boundaries. This kind of unity threatened the careful balance of power that kept the older species in control. The final day of evaluation involved individual presentations where each student had to propose a solution to a real ongoing galactic problem. Hannah chose to discuss the refugee crisis in the outer rim territories where millions of beings had been displaced by conflicts that the council refused to acknowledge publicly. She knew about this situation from intelligence reports, but she presented her information as if she had learned it from news broadcasts and academic papers. Her presentation walked a careful line between showing genuine concern for the refugees and avoiding any mention of the military aspects of the crisis. She proposed humanitarian aid programs and resettlement initiatives while carefully avoiding any discussion of the weapons shipments and territorial disputes that were really driving the conflict. The council members listening to her presentation nodded approvingly at what they thought was naive idealism from a sheltered human student, but Hannah wasn't the only one who gave an impressive presentation. Velter proposed a revolutionary new approach to trade negotiations that would give younger species more influence in economic decisions. Klixa presented a detailed analysis of communication barriers between different types of consciousness that could transform diplomatic relations. Li Jinwoo suggested cultural exchange programs that would help reduce the prejudices that led to most interspecies conflicts. The quality of ideas coming from the student presentations was far superior to anything Hannah had heard in the official council sessions. These young beings had fresh perspectives and creative solutions that could solve problems the older generation had given up on, but instead of being pleased, the council members looked increasingly uncomfortable as each presentation revealed how limited their own thinking had become. As the evaluation period ended, Hannah felt confident that she had maintained her cover successfully. She had performed well enough to avoid suspicion while appearing appropriately respectful of council authority, but more importantly, she had discovered something that might be even more valuable than military intelligence. The next generation of galactic citizens was ready for real change and cooperation. But their elders were determined to prevent that change from happening. The conflict between old and young might be the key to everything. If Earth could find a way to ally with the younger generation, they could bypass the Council entirely and build something better, but that would require a completely different approach than anyone on Earth had considered. The real battle wasn't between humans and aliens, it was between those who wanted to maintain the status quo and those who were ready to build a better future. Walking back to her dormitory that evening, Hannah realized that her mission had become much more complex than simple intelligence gathering. She was now positioned to influence the future direction of galactic civilization, but one wrong move could trigger a generational war that would destroy any hope of peaceful progress. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Month 4 brought discoveries that shattered everything. Hannah thought she knew about the Council and humanity's place in galactic history. Her cover as a linguistics researcher had given her access to the station's historical archives, where she spent her days supposedly studying the evolution of interspecies communication. What she actually found there made her question every assumption Earth had made about first contact and galactic politics. The public archives contained exactly what she expected to find: thousands of years of carefully recorded history showing how the Council had grown from a small alliance of neighboring species into a massive galactic government. The official records painted a picture of steady progress toward universal peace and cooperation, with the Council serving as wise mediators who helped younger species learn to live in harmony with their galactic neighbors. But Hannah had learned to look deeper than official records. Her intelligence training had taught her how to spot inconsistencies in historical documents, and she quickly noticed that certain time periods were covered in much less detail than others. Entire centuries were summarized in just a few pages, while less important events received extensive documentation. The gaps were too convenient to be accidental. Using her linguistic research credentials, she requested access to older records that were stored in restricted sections of the archive. The archivists were happy to help what they thought was an eager student working on her thesis about ancient communication methods. They unlocked databases that hadn't been accessed in decades and gave her permission to examine files that most Council members had probably never seen. What she found in those forgotten records changed everything. The Council had not grown through peaceful expansion and voluntary membership. The truth was far darker. Dozens of species had been conquered or absorbed through economic pressure and military intimidation. The wars had been hidden behind diplomatic language and trade agreements, but the pattern was always the same. First contact would be followed by gradual infiltration, then economic dependence, and finally complete subjugation. The most shocking discovery involved a species called the hegemony, who had once controlled a significant portion of what was now Council space. According to the hidden records, they had been a proud and independent civilization with technology that rivaled the most advanced Council members, but they had made the mistake of refusing to join the Council when first invited. The official history claimed they had died out from a natural plague, but the classified files told a different story. The hegemony had been systematically destroyed through a combination of economic warfare, biological weapons, and direct military action. Their planets were quarantined under the pretense of containing disease, while Council forces eliminated any survivors who might carry on their culture or technology. Within 50 years, an entire civilization had been erased from history and their worlds were redistributed among loyal Council members. But even that terrible revelation wasn't the most important thing. Hannah discovered hidden deep in the most restricted files, she found records of humanity's first contact with the Council. This wasn't supposed to exist according to everything Earth knew about galactic history. The official story was that human space exploration had only recently reached the point where contact was possible. But the truth was very different. 50 years ago, a human exploration ship called the Soul Wanderer had encountered a Council patrol while investigating a distant star system. The ship was commanded by Captain Song Yurim, a veteran explorer who had led dozens of successful missions into unknown space. The Council patrol had expected to find another primitive species that could be easily intimidated into submission. What they found instead was a human captain who impressed them with her tactical thinking and diplomatic skills. The classified report written by the Council Patrol Commander described Captain Song as unlike any being they had encountered before. She had somehow anticipated their standard first contact procedures and had prepared responses that turned every attempted manipulation back on itself when they tried to demonstrate superior technology. She pointed out flaws in their systems that their own engineers hadn't noticed when they attempted to establish psychological dominance. She responded with humor and confidence that left them confused and off balance more. Importantly, Captain Song had somehow obtained detailed information about Council military capabilities and political structure before the supposed first contact even occurred. The patrol commander suspected that humans had been observing the Council for years and had learned far more about galactic civilization than they were admitting. This made them potentially dangerous in ways that other species had never been. The Council faced a dilemma. They could destroy the human ship and prevent Earth from learning about galactic civilization, but that would eliminate a species that showed remarkable potential. Alternatively, they could allow the humans to return home while keeping them under careful observation. The decision was made to let Captain Song go, but to monitor Earth closely while preparing plans for eventual contact under controlled conditions. Everything that had happened since then had been orchestrated by the Council. The sudden breakthrough in human space technology had been guided by subtle interventions in Earth's scientific development. The invitation to apply for Council membership had been timed to occur exactly when the Council wanted it to happen. Even the evaluation process had been designed to gather intelligence about human capabilities while giving the Council maximum control over the final decision. Hana realized with growing horror that Earth had walked into a carefully prepared trap. The Council had been planning humanity's subjugation for 50 years and had manipulated events to ensure that first contact would occur on their terms. They had studied human psychology and culture extensively while keeping Earth completely ignorant of galactic realities. The application process wasn't really an evaluation, it was the final stage of a conquest that had been in progress for decades, but there was more buried in those ancient files. The secret meetings that Hana had been monitoring weren't just about what to do with humanity. They were part of a larger debate about the Council's future direction. The older members wanted to continue the traditional pattern of expansion through conquest and absorption, but a growing faction believed that approach was becoming too dangerous in a galaxy where younger species were developing more advanced technology. The moderate faction led by Commander Colvin had been studying the human problem for years and had reached some disturbing conclusions. Humanity represented a new type of challenge that the Council had never faced before. Most species were either too primitive to resist or too focused on their own worlds to threaten Council dominance, but humans were different. They were curious, aggressive, and adaptable in ways that made them potentially impossible to control through traditional methods. The most frightening possibility was that other young species might learn from the human. Example, if Earth successfully resisted Council domination, it could inspire a galaxy-wide rebellion that would destroy the entire system of control that the older species had spent millennia building. The Council faced a choice between accepting genuine equality with younger species or escalating to levels of violence that might destroy galactic civilization entirely. As Hannah read through file after file of hidden history, she began to understand the true scope of the crisis facing both humanity and the galaxy. The Council wasn't just evaluating whether to accept Earth as a member, they were deciding whether to attempt the complete destruction of human civilization before it could inspire other species to resist their dominance. The fleet movements that Earth had detected weren't just precautionary measures, they were preparation for genocide, but she also discovered something that gave her hope. The younger generation of aliens that she had observed during the evaluation exercises weren't the first to question the Council's methods. Similar groups had formed on dozens of worlds over the past century as younger beings gained access to historical records and began to understand what their governments had really done. Many of these groups were secretly communicating with each other through encrypted networks that the older generation didn't know existed. The generational conflict that Hana had noticed was actually part of a much larger movement toward change that was spreading across the galaxy. Young beings from hundreds of different species were beginning to work together to build alternatives to the Council's authoritarian system. They lacked the military power to challenge the established order directly, but they represented the future of every species in the galaxy. As she finally closed the last classified file and prepared to leave the archive, Hannah understood that her mission had evolved far beyond gathering intelligence about Council capabilities. She now possessed information that could change the course of galactic history. But she also carried the terrible knowledge that humanity was living on borrowed time. The Council would make their decision soon, and if they chose violence, Earth would have very little warning. The game was no longer about whether humans were worthy of Council membership. It was about whether any species would be allowed to remain free and independent in a galaxy controlled by beings who saw diversity as a threat to their power. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Hannah was perhaps the only person in the galaxy who understood. With only 1 month remaining before the Council would announce their decision about humanity's membership application, Hannah received an encrypted message that changed everything. The communication arrived disguised as a routine academic update from her supposed professor, but the hidden data buried within contained intelligence that made her blood run cold. Earth's orbital defense stations had detected massive fleet movements throughout Council space, and the pattern suggested preparation for military action against Earth itself. The message came from Director Choi Sung-in, the head of Earth's Strategic Intelligence Division, who had been monitoring galactic communications from a secret facility hidden beneath the mountains of Korea. The intelligence satellites that Earth had quietly deployed over the past year were finally providing the complete picture of what the Council was really planning. Admiral Vexmer's casual mention of fleet exercises had been more accurate than he realized, but the true scope of the military buildup was far beyond what any single species could deploy. 3 separate Council fleets were positioning themselves along Earth's borders, with each group containing enough firepower to sterilize an entire planet. The official explanation was routine training exercises designed to test coordination between different species militaries, but the timing and positioning made their real purpose obvious. They were preparing to enforce the Council's decision, regardless of what that decision might be. If humanity was accepted into the Council, the fleets would ensure compliance with whatever restrictive terms were imposed. If humanity was rejected, the ships were positioned to prevent Earth from seeking alliances with individual species or establishing independent trade relationships. The most disturbing part of the intelligence report was that several Council members had been caught completely off guard by the fleet movements when Ambassador Corlin had inquired about Christic's ships being reassigned to border patrol duty. She had been told that the orders came directly from the High Command, without any input from the regular Council committees. Even species that had seemed sympathetic to humanity were being kept in the dark about military preparations. This suggested that the hardline faction within the Council had gained enough influence to act independently of the normal decision-making process. But Director Choi's message also contained new instructions that reflected Earth's growing understanding of the situation. The original mission parameters had assumed that the Council was a unified organization that would make a collective decision about humanity's application. Now that Earth understood the true complexity of galactic politics, the mission had evolved into something much more ambitious. Hannah was no longer just gathering intelligence. She was being authorized to actively influence the outcome of the Council's internal power struggle. The key to everything was the psychological profiles that Hannah had been developing for each major Council member. Over the past 4 months, she had identified their fears, ambitions, personal relationships, and hidden weaknesses. More importantly, she had mapped out the complex web of alliances and rivalries that determined how decisions were really made within the Council. The hardliners, led by Queen Zikra and Admiral Vexmore, controlled the military apparatus, but they lacked support among the economic powers. The moderates had more diverse backing, but were divided about how far they were willing to go. To challenge the established order, the most intriguing figure remained Commander Colvin, whose Nexian Republic represented a small but technologically advanced species that punched above its weight in Council politics. His faction understood that the galaxy was changing, and that the old methods of control were becoming unsustainable, but they also knew that openly challenging the hardliners could trigger a civil war that would destroy everything they were trying to protect. Colvin needed a catalyst that would force the council to choose between evolution and self-destruction. Hannah realized that she could be that catalyst, but the timing would have to be perfect. She began making subtle contact with moderate council members, using her cover as a graduate student to arrange informal meetings and discussions. Her approach was carefully calculated to plant seeds of doubt about the hardliners' policies while avoiding any direct challenge to council authority. The key was to make each target believe that they were reaching their own conclusions about the need for change. Her first major breakthrough came during a seemingly casual conversation with Ambassador Corlin in the station's Crystal Garden. The Christic being had been growing increasingly frustrated with being excluded from military planning decisions and was beginning to question whether her species' interests were really being served by blind loyalty to the council leadership. Hannah mentioned some historical parallels between current galactic tensions and conflicts that had preceded previous council crises without directly stating any conclusions the conversation was designed to make. Corlin think about whether the council's current approach was sustainable in the long term. The crystal being was intelligent enough to see the implications without having them spelled out, and over the following days, she began asking pointed questions during council committee meetings. Her inquiries made other moderate members realize that they too were being kept in the dark about crucial decisions affecting their species. Similar conversations with other key figures gradually created a network of doubt and suspicion within the moderate faction. They began meeting more frequently to share information and coordinate their responses to hardliner initiatives. The irony was that Hannah was using the same tactics that the hardliners had been employing against the moderates, but in reverse. The difference was that her version was based on truth rather than propaganda. The real breakthrough came when Admiral Vexmore made a crucial mistake. During one of his regular coffee meetings with Hannah, he had been drinking Altarian wine, which affected his judgment more than he realized, and began complaining about having to coordinate with species that he considered inferior. The alcohol loosened his tongue enough that he revealed the true purpose of the fleet movements and the timeline for their planned implementation. According to Vexmore, the fleets weren't just positioned to respond to human resistance, they were there to enforce compliance. Regardless of the Council's official decision, if humanity was granted membership, the ships would ensure that Earth accepted whatever limitations were imposed without negotiation. If membership was denied, the fleets would prevent any attempt to establish independent relationships with individual Council species. The ultimate goal was to bring humanity under complete Council control within 6 months, but the most shocking revelation was that the fleet deployment had been authorized by a secret committee that included only the most hardline Council members. They had bypassed the normal approval process by claiming emergency powers based on intelligence reports about human military capabilities that painted Earth as an imminent threat to galactic security. The reports were deliberately exaggerated, but they provided legal justification for military action that would have been impossible to obtain through regular channels. Hannah finally understood the complete picture. The hardliners weren't just planning to reject humanity's application, they were preparing to eliminate Earth as an independent power before other young species could follow the human example. The fleet movements were the first stage of a broader campaign to crush any resistance to Council authority and establish permanent dominance over the entire galaxy. This information was exactly what the moderate faction needed to challenge the hardliners legally and politically, but getting it to them without exposing her true identity would require careful planning. Hannah began drafting a series of anonymous reports that would gradually reveal the secret committee's activities to Council members who had been excluded from the decision-making process. The reports were designed to look like they came from concerned staff members within the military bureaucracy who were worried about the legal implications of unauthorized fleet deployments. Each document contained just enough classified information to be believable while carefully avoiding anything that could be traced back to her surveillance activities. The goal was to create a crisis of confidence within the Council that would force the moderate faction to act as she prepared to implement this plan. Hannah realized that she was no longer just an intelligence operative gathering information for Earth. She had become a key player in a galactic power struggle That would determine the future of every species in the known universe. The quiet student sitting in the back row of the council chamber was about to trigger a political earthquake. That would either save the galaxy from authoritarian control or plunge it into a civil war that could destroy everything. The final phase of her mission was about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. The council thought they were preparing to judge humanity, but they were about to discover that humanity had been judging them all along, and the verdict was about to shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The final day had arrived, and the massive council chamber buzzed with excitement as delegates from across the galaxy gathered to deliver their historic verdict on humanity's application for membership. The golden walls seemed to glow brighter than usual, as if the station itself understood the importance of what was about to happen. Hundreds of beings filled the circular seating arrangement, with the most powerful ambassadors occupying the front rows while lesser diplomats and observers took positions further back. Hannah walked into the chamber carrying the same worn notebook she had used for 4 months, but today she wasn't alone. Director Choi Soo-min accompanied her, wearing the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. His presence was officially listed as that of a neutral observer, but every council member who saw him understood the real message. Earth had sent its top intelligence official to witness their decision. This was no longer a simple evaluation, it was a confrontation. Between equals, they took their seats in the back row just as they had planned, but their positioning was strategic rather than submissive. From that location, they could see every delegate and monitor all the exits while remaining far enough away to avoid being trapped if the situation turned violent. The small recording devices hidden in Hannah's clothing would capture everything that happened for transmission back to Earth, where military commanders were waiting to implement response plans. Based on the Council's final decision, Commander Colvin stood at the central podium to begin the proceedings. His tall gray form commanded attention as he explained the format for the day's events. Each major species would present their evaluation of humanity's worthiness, followed by a final vote that would determine Earth's fate. The Nexian commander spoke with formal dignity, but Hannah could see the tension in his posture. He knew that today would determine not just humanity's future, but the direction of galactic civilization itself. The presentations began exactly as Hannah had expected. Queen Zikra was first, and her harsh voice filled the chamber as she detailed humanity's many failings. According to the Vespian leader, humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to be trusted with advanced technology. She presented evidence of Earth's wars and conflicts as proof that humanity would bring violence and chaos to the peaceful galaxy that the Council had worked so hard to create. Her compound eyes glowed red with satisfaction as she recommended complete rejection of the human application. Admiral Vexmore followed with a presentation that was more sophisticated but equally damning. He acknowledged human military capabilities but argued that those very abilities made Earth a threat to galactic stability. His speech was filled with technical details about human weapons and tactics that impressed the other delegates with his thorough research. What they didn't know was that most of his information had come directly from his conversations with the woman sitting quietly in the back row. Ambassador Scarth from the Draconian Empire delivered the most vicious attack on humanity. His red scales seemed to burn as he described humans as a disease that would spread across the galaxy if given the chance. According to him, the only safe course was to quarantine Earth permanently and prevent any further contact between humans and civilized species. His words were so extreme that even some hardline delegates looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up to challenge his assessment. The moderate faction presented more balanced evaluations, but their conclusions were still largely negative. Ambassador Corlin acknowledged human creativity and adaptability, but argued that these qualities needed to be carefully controlled through limited membership with extensive restrictions. Commander Thalax from the Hegemony Successor States suggested a probationary period during which humans would be monitored closely while gradually earning more privileges through demonstrated good behavior. As the presentations continued, Hannah noticed something important happening in the audience. The younger delegates and staff members were exchanging glances and subtle gestures that suggested growing discomfort with what they were hearing. Several junior ambassadors were taking extensive notes while looking increasingly troubled by the gap between the council's stated principles and the harsh reality of the evaluation process. When the formal presentations ended, Commander Colvin called for questions and comments from the floor. This was the moment Hannah had been waiting for. She stood slowly from her seat in the back row and felt hundreds of alien eyes turned toward her. The chamber fell silent as beings who had dismissed her as an irrelevant human student suddenly realized that something significant was about to happen. Her voice carried clearly through the vast space as she identified herself as Commander Park Hanna of Earth's Strategic Intelligence Division rather than the graduate student everyone thought they knew. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several delegates demanded her removal, while others called for security forces. Queen Zikra rose from her seat, with her wings buzzing angrily as she accused the humans of infiltrating the council through deception and lies. But Commander Colvin called for order and invoked the ancient right of response that allowed any being to address the council if they had relevant information about the matter under discussion. The chamber gradually quieted as curiosity overcame outrage. The delegates wanted to know what this human spy had discovered during her months of secret observation. What followed wasn't a desperate plea for acceptance or a list of humanity's achievements. Instead, Hannah delivered a comprehensive analysis of the council itself. She methodically detailed their hidden wars, their systematic oppression of younger species, and their deliberate distortion of galactic history. Her words were calm and factual, but they